Well, good morning. We're going to continue today in our series in the book of Psalms. We'll continue this another couple of weeks, in fact, but today we're going to Psalm 90, and the hope is it will encourage you, not discourage you or depress. It's a little intense, Psalm 90, and let me read from verse 12 to the end of that chapter. We'll focus there. We don't have time to give the whole chapter all that it would need, but we're going to focus in on the clarity that this great book tells us, and that this Psalm of Moses, a prayer of Moses is what Psalm 90 is, that we'll learn how to really make every day count, because every day matters. Psalm 90, and I'm reading from the New Living. Teach us to realize the brevity of life so that we may grow in wisdom. O Lord, come back to us. How long will you delay? Take pity on your servants. Satisfy us each morning with your unfailing love, so we may sing for joy to the end of our lives. Give us gladness in proportion to our former misery. Replace the evil years with good. Let us, your servants, see you work again. Let our children see your glory. And may the Lord our God show us his approval and make our efforts successful. Yes, make our efforts successful. Printed on your note page is verse 12, and we're going to zero in really right in verse 12. Teach us to number our days aright, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Psalm 39, David would refer to this very similar thought as Moses in Psalm 90 and Psalm 39. David says it this way: show me, Lord, my life's end and number of my days. Let me know how fleeting my life is. Everyone is but a breath. Even those whom seem secure, in vain they rush about, heaping up wealth without knowing whose it will finally be. But now, Lord, look, what do I love for? What do I live for? What do I live and love and breathe for? My hope is in you. My hope is in you. Whenever I go to my files I've been keeping for a lot of years, I'll find articles that I would have read in newspapers, magazines, whatever, before they were all available on an iPad. And Time Magazine or Wall Street Journal, some of those, USA Today. And so I came across an article I'd clipped out, and it's hard to believe. Some of you will remember this time. Some of you weren't born yet, but Time Magazine ran a full article in their magazine. This is a couple of decades ago now. And the essence of the message was this: because of advances in technology, within 20 years or so, people will have to radically cut back on how many hours a week they worked, or how many weeks a year they worked, or else they'll have to start retiring sooner. Why? What will we do with all our free time? Because of technology, what are we going to do with all this free time? That's what they were thinking 20 years ago. All this technology is going to make our lives easier. We're not going to have nearly as much time to work or to occupy our minds, so we'll have all this free time. What are we going to do with it? Of course, that never happened. It never came true. There's a book that Parker Palmer wrote, and he tells a story. It's a fascinating story, and apparently still is a process that is done today by ranchers and farmers in the winter months. In this book, Parker Palmer writes, it's a book called A Hidden Wholeness. He relates a story about farmers in the Midwest who would prepare for blizzards by tying a rope from the back door of their house out to the barn as a guide to ensure that during a blizzard, they could get back to their house. I've never been in any kind of a weather scenario like that, but it does exist in the colder climates, of course. So these blizzards would come quickly and fiercely. They were very dangerous. When the full force of a blizzard was blowing, a farmer could not often see the end of their own hand. And there have been some who froze to death in those blizzards. Disoriented by their inability to see, they wandered in circles, lost in their own backyards. And if they lost the grip on that rope, it became impossible for them to find the back door to their house. And to this day, in parts of Canada and the Great Plains, meteorologists will counsel people that to avoid getting lost in blinding snow when they venture outside, take a good sturdy rope, tie one in before the blizzards come, tie one in to the back door of your home, or the closest to the barn and grasp the other end firmly when you walk into that scenario. Peter Scazzaro has written a book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. It's a great book. And he says that many of us have lost our way spiritually in the whiteout of the blizzards swirling around us, occupying our time, demanding our attention, making us feel often insecure if we're not up to par, up to speed, or moving as fast as someone else around us seems to be moving. If we aren't busy, we feel guilty that we're not being productive, that we're not working. John Ortberg, one of my favorite pastors out in San Francisco, Menlo Park Presbyterian, says this: American society is filled with ideas and values and pressures and temptations about success and security and comfort and happiness that we will not even notice unless we withdraw on occasion. And he told his church many years ago, I'm begging you today to carefully evaluate how you spend your time. I suppose I'm saying the same thing to you today. I'm begging you today to carefully evaluate how you spend your time. Every day matters. And take it from me, I wish I had spent more time thinking about that in the last 20 years, 30 years. Occasionally when the car needs servicing and or needs some warranty work or a recall or something, I'll try to do all that usually on a Friday. And Friday mornings till noon typically are pretty busy wrapping up the details of the message and all the stuff you see in print, all the slides you see on screens, that has to be proofed and signed off and all that good stuff. So usually by about noon Friday, those things are done. And I can spend the rest of the afternoon finishing the message, take a little time off, and go do something productive, typically in the yard. There's always something to cut and trim. Something about that frees me from all the pressures. I just cut and trim and all that. So it's kind of weird, but I do it. So that morning that the car needed to go to the dealership, I told Kim, she says, do you need somebody to pick you up? And I said, no, I'll walk back. And she looked at me. You know, if you know the story that Kim's the runner, I'm not. Kim's fit, I'm not. You know that whole scenario. Kim's up before dark, I'm not. So she looked at me and she said, you're going to walk back? I said, yeah. We're not that far. I mean, really, it's maybe 1.5 miles from the dealership. I mean, if I could walk a straight line from our house straight to the dealership, I could cut through and it'd be 1 mile. But it's about 1.5 miles, 2 miles. Easy walk. There's a brief period of time I'm on Memorial Road. It's over there, Kelly and Memorial. There's a brief time, but I learned how to cut through and make sure I get to the Memorial Road when it's the shortest possible amount of time I would have to spend trying to get without a sidewalk around this area of the bridge without, getting hit by a car. That would be a good idea for me to do that. So I've got it all figured out. So I take the car for service and I start walking back. Now there's a big cemetery over there, if you notice. Big cemetery right by the dealership. So I cut through there. It wasn't that long ago. It was a fascinating experience. I really thought I'd just be cutting through a cemetery, and at first it felt a little odd. Should I be in here? I'm walking around. Is anybody going to stop me? Are they going to think I'm up to no good in here? What's this guy doing walking? Nobody. Thankfully, I was able to have a very long and peaceful walk through a cemetery. It was fascinating. I think God planned that for me. I needed that walk through the cemetery. As morbid and goofy as that may sound, I needed that walk. I would see all these grave markers. Some had nice, big, elaborate stones. Others just a little flat marker on the ground. And I've been in that cemetery many, many, many times through 30 years of ministry in this place. I could find people that I knew. I recognized some gravesides that I'd stood there many, many years ago when we said goodbye to people that some had died very unexpectedly and others had a long period of illness, and we kind of saw it coming. It's always great walking through there because I can find my father-in-law's stone where he's buried, and I can always kind of walk by there, and for a minute you get that little tinge in your gut of, wow, I wish we still had him with us, And then you notice on every tombstone, they all have the date of birth and the date of death. If not the full date, at least the year. And you've heard the story, I'm sure, about the dash, and there's a lot of talk about that life happens between those two dates. There's just a simple little line that separates the two dates, and that's where life happens. And then you see on some of these, the bigger tombstones, you'll see some inscriptions that people have maybe put a verse or a thought or something, a quote from someone that was important to them. Kim asked me one day, what do I want on my tombstone? It seemed to be an odd question, I felt, because I didn't know if she had something in mind or was planning or praying for something I wasn't aware of. But she said, what do you want on your tombstone? And maybe it was as I was telling her this story. So I said, I know exactly what I want on my tombstone. She goes, what? I said, I told you I was sick. I know, it's just bizarre, isn't it? But there's a reason. You see, Kim being fit and active and all that, she really doesn't get sick much. And for some reason, if there's sinus infection in the air, I'll get it. If one of the kids or grandkids now are sick, I could probably pick it up. I'm a magnet for those things. So sometimes it's a little hard, and I really don't feel very well, and she kind of gives you that look. Get up, suck it up, and go to work. She doesn't say that. She's a very compassionate, kind lady. But I mean, she just never seems to have to want to sit still very long, And my head's all stopped up. And so I told her, I said, one of these days, I'm really going to be sick. And you're going to wish you had taken me seriously. So that's why I want on my tombstone. I told you I was sick. Walking through that cemetery made me think of Psalm 90. God, teach me to appreciate every day, because every day matters. Teach me to think clearly about the days, because you've said that we'll gain wisdom if we'll do that. This is a Psalm of Moses, and it's all about making the most of those days. Think about it now. Don't wait till you get to the end of life and have regrets. What was not said or done. Wisdom is making the most of our days by living out priorities we believe that God has called us to embrace. For me, it was ministry in the church. For others, it's to lead a business or to grow something or lead a family. One of the great callings of God, I think, is to be a mom, to be parents. Teach us to number these days. Now, of course, we don't know how many we'll get. We're not sure what the dash will be for us. We're not sure what the end date will be. We can't possibly predict that. But what would happen if we did this? Just as morbid or as maybe depressing as it may seem to be talking about this subject, if we just stop for maybe 20 or 30 minutes here and give this some thought. Now, there are three realities of life that Psalm 90 points out. We didn't read the whole chapter, but in verses 1 and 2 of Psalm 90, we learn the first reality of life, and that is that God is eternal. God is eternal. He was, He is, He always will be. God is God. In fact, I run into people that don't believe in God. And honestly, typically, it's because what they have seen people who claim to believe in God doing that causes people to not believe in God. And surely you know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of that, unfortunately, that I think a lot of people who love God, serve God, and believe in God have not done a great job representing Him. But I say to people often, it takes a lot more faith to believe there is no God than it does to believe in Him. There's a lot more evidence that would lead us to believe there is a God. Now, I believe there is a God, but to me, even if you don't, there's so much evidence around it would at least compel you to give it some thought. And I go to Romans 1:20 where it says, "For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and the sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see His invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God." Now, I know God certainly by creation. What makes the sun come up, the clouds look incredible, and sunsets. Who made all this work? There's no way something this complex could have just happened. So we know the reality is that God is forever. He's eternal. And I believe that. I believe God was here long before I was. He'll be here long after I'm gone. This is God. He's eternal. The second reality of life is that we're temporary. All right? This is no-brainer stuff. We are. I wish we weren't. But we are. We're not made to live a couple of 100 years. I don't know what you think you'll get. How long would you like to be alive? Some will say, oh, I hope I get 80 years. Well, I'd love to be 90. You know, if you've got a relative or grandma that's nearly 100, you think, wow, wouldn't it be great to live to 100, you know? I don't know what your thoughts might be on that one. But we're just not meant to be here forever. I don't want to depress you or discourage you, but it's a fact of life. We're just not meant to live forever. And I think that starts hitting you sometimes as you approach maybe your late 40s or 50s, certainly as you approach 60. You start realizing this thing called life has moved a lot faster than I ever thought it would. And if I could go back, I'd do a few things differently. I'd get less uptight about some things that I could get uptight about. I'd certainly dial it back when the intensity of this growing church was just knocking me over almost every day. And I would sometimes let that stress or that pressure enter into how I treated sometimes my own family. You get stressed or you get tense and you could be sharp or snippy. You could be quick to say something you just didn't need to say. You can hurt somebody's feelings when you didn't intend to. Why would we do that? Why would we put ourselves in that predicament? But we do it. We do it far too often. God is eternal. We're temporary. And life is difficult. That's the third lesson in this, the third reality. Life is difficult. You don't need me to tell you that. I get the question all the time when I talk about this topic. I'll tell you this. I get it all the time. Why would God allow this to happen, whatever this may be? Why would God allow that? Why would God cause that? Why wouldn't God heal this person of cancer as hard as we prayed? And I used to really wrestle with that. I used to think, I better go study the Bible even more, which is always a good idea, so I can find the appropriate way to answer that question. Why God? Why would God do this? And I've finally realized that's not even the right question. Because Jesus was so kind to us when he was here to let us know that in this world we're going to have trials. And I finally learned that's my answer. That is when someone says, why would this happen? Well, because we were told in advance by God in flesh that in this world we're living in, we're going to have trials of many kinds. In this world, trials of many kinds. Isn't that great that he told us that? You see, I think what I find happening is I want what I think heaven will be like. I want it here. And that's not possible. Heaven will be there. And when I do finally take my last breath, I'll be there. That's what the Bible promises. I've seen enough people dying in those last few minutes through my 35 years in ministry to know something special kind of happens. That not everybody has that experience, and not every believer may have that experience. But I've watched people do amazing things like 15 minutes before they take their last breath, or they smile real big, or that's like, wow, they're seeing something amazing. I've seen enough of that to think whatever is on the other side, the Bible's kind of clear about it, it must be really something special. So that day will come, I'll get to see what that is. It must be amazing. But in this world, we're just going to have trials. And none of us are guaranteed not to have them. Not one of us. Last Tuesday morning, I did something that I get to do frequently. I stood in the back of our chapel. It was packed. And a 42-year-old mom was being remembered. We prayed for her for a long time. She had very severe cancer. She knew when the diagnosis came that it was terminal. 42 years old. 3 beautiful 14-year-old daughters, triplets. A loving husband, a dad and a mom. And, for a minute, standing in the back, the sadness of that, even though it was really a fabulous service, honoring Jesus as the family, that's what the family wanted. But for a moment, I have to admit, I slipped back into this. In this circumstance, God, could you not have just what? And then I had to remember, not only is she cancer-free, she's free of all the junk that comes with living on planet Earth. And as awful as it felt for those girls, I realized she's in God's hands. How thankful we were that we knew without a doubt she knew what was coming her way whenever that last breath was taken. God is forever, folks. We're temporary. Life is difficult. Those are the realities of living this human life on planet Earth. So what are we going to do with all this? Let's go back to Psalm 90. It says, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. So how do we number our days? Let's talk about this. What are the benefits then of numbering our days, of giving some thought to our days, of giving some thought to how we're going to live our life into the future? Because we have a great tendency to spend too much of our time, too much of our life trying to impress somebody, be like somebody else, or live up to somebody else's expectations. I think social media is in some ways great. I think in other ways it's put a lot of pressure on the culture because we see pictures of what somebody's life looks like and we think, I want my life to look like that too. And I grew up in a world we didn't have that comparison to make, quite that stark and so immediate. And I wonder if perhaps a lot of our mental health issues happening more and more to our teenagers, our younger people, I wonder if those issues have a lot to do with the amount of time and information that's passing through our eyes and our brains with these walking computers we carry. If we'll give thought to our days, how do I want to live my day? How do I want to live tomorrow? And what's had me troubled lately that needs to just stop? There's a benefit here, and the first one is this. We'll approach the future differently. If we'll take the Bible serious here, we'll approach the future differently. You know, as Christ followers, we have a lot to consider about our future. You know, Jesus speaks in the Bible, it's a text usually pastors will use when they were talking about giving and giving our tithe to the church. And Jesus in this teaching on giving that will be given to us, and there's several topics or several texts in there about this giving thing. And Jesus makes this comment, go sell, to the rich young ruler, he says this, go sell everything you've got, give it away, and you'll have treasure in heaven. Now, that's not the only way to have treasure in heaven. In fact, that was just tailor-made for that particular person who didn't realize what could happen if he just did what Jesus said, because Jesus would probably have a way of coming back, and the man would probably have more than he ever dreamed in so many ways. When we do what God tells us to do, when we obey the Bible, it's pretty simple. Good things are going to happen. So Jesus talks about laying up treasure in heaven. And it's not just with our money. What kind of treasure are we going to lay aside or lay up for later as we invest in the people around us, as we are determined to walk like Jesus and to talk and think and be like Jesus? And to maybe think more about people and time with people instead of all these other things that seem to stretch us and take our attention and our focus. If we'll number our days, it says we're going to approach the future much differently. Secondly, the benefit of numbering our day, we're going to spend our lives more wisely. Even today, if we'll just stop and think about it. If you'll just spend 15 minutes today thinking about it. And if you're really brave, spend 30 or an hour. Or maybe start tomorrow with 30 minutes. Giving thought to your day. Giving thought to how important is it? What day is this going to be for you? What's the gift in this day? And is it worth some of the things we let happen in our thinking on so many days? I think we'll spend our days more wisely. Let's think for a minute now, let's just look at the ultimate model. How did Jesus manage his day? How did he manage his time? Well, it would seem, if you want to read those stories, he would focus on the person standing right in front of him. He focused on the person right in front of him in that moment. If Jesus had chosen to live in our time instead of ancient Israel, I wonder how that would have gone. Would he have consulted a daily planner? Would he have an iPhone? Would he be emailing us and texting us a blessing? I wonder what he'd do. Can you imagine Jesus being paged out of the Last Supper? Or in the middle of serving the bread and the cup to his disciples, he gets a text message. And what's he do? Like, well, we look down, like, we don't want anybody to know we're looking, but we're looking. And surely you don't do this, where you would start actually responding, while you're supposed to be paying attention to something else. I catch myself and I think, this doesn't have to be done right now. It will be okay if I respond to this text when I'm finished with whatever I'm doing. If we'll number our days, we'll approach the future differently, and we'll do that by spending our days more wisely. And that's exactly what Jesus did. When you look at the deeper life of Christ, there's no indication he worked 20-hour ministry days. He went to sleep every night without having healed every disease in Israel. He apparently slept well. He didn't minister to everybody who wanted him. This isn't a real popular topic because you don't want to go too far with this about Jesus laying his hands or praying for certain people, but not others. He was human. He was God. Can you imagine the torture of being God trapped in the limitations and temptations of a human body? So he, as God in flesh, had to do something he'd never had to do before, and that was get tired. How many times we read Jesus got into a boat and headed across the lake? That's a nice way of saying he was tired and he had to get away from the crowds. And Jesus was always doing that. It's not that popular of a topic, I guess, but you got to understand, he didn't give everybody around him what they wanted from him and that he could have given them. Now, that's not necessarily an excuse, but it's certainly an example. He didn't get to visit or teach everybody who wanted it. There were many needs that he simply chose not to meet. We don't know why. Even when his friend Lazarus was sick and then died, and he got word that his great friend had died, Jesus didn't drop everything in that moment and get to the tomb of Lazarus. It took him a couple of days. Is this to imply that Jesus didn't care? No. It's to imply that he understood what it meant to be human. That was really probably one of the more torturous things that happened to him. Just being human and trapped in all the limitations of God trapped in a human body. Jesus understood what it meant to prioritize, to balance in light of those limits, how to focus on what was most important. And we can learn from Jesus, it's okay to occasionally say, I've got to leave this place and go to the other side of the lake and be alone. We need some margin is what we need. I wonder if we all started being as ferocious about finding margin as we are about packing so much into our life. Margin. Margin emotionally. So you can't run this fast all the time with your emotions intact. Eventually you're going to get tired, and that's when we lose our tempers. That's when, like I said before, I'm guilty of disciplining a 5-year-old while acting worse than one. And we say things to each other in families that just shouldn't be said. We say things to little kids that they don't need. It's not time for them to hear stuff like that. Their brains can't comprehend that. And I especially think of that as a parent. Because we don't leave any margin. And we're running on a thin wire, this thin line. We don't have much margin emotionally, physically. We certainly have not created margin in a schedule that just lets us breathe a little bit. Unfortunately, too many people don't create any margin in their finances. And this is not good. If we'll number our days, we approach the future differently. We'll spend our days more wisely. And then the last thing I would say is what Psalm 90 says. We'll gain wisdom. If we'll do that, we will gain wisdom. Henry Nouwen's a great author. I have, I guess, all of his books probably. Here's what he says. He says, sometimes God will tap us on the shoulder, and we're so busy we don't even know he's tapping our shoulders. He says in the spiritual life, the word discipline, now we know what discipline means if you're an athlete, or what discipline means in terms of being true to your schedule, or disciplining yourself to work out or maintain a schedule and get things accomplished that you want to accomplish. That's discipline for most of us as we know it. There's another definition for discipline out of the Bible. The scriptural side of discipline is this. It means the effort to create some space in which God can act. See, we think of discipline as getting everything done we've put into our day. What the Bible's saying is discipline means you're going to leave some room. So when God's tapping on your shoulder or knocking on the door of your heart, you'll know. It means to prevent everything in your life from being filled up. It means that somewhere you're not occupied and certainly not preoccupied. In the spiritual life, discipline means to create that space in which something can happen that you hadn't planned on or counted on. Just imagine. Let me just tease you with some incentive to take this one simple verse serious, and that is this. Just think what might happen between you and God if you just pulled back a little bit and began to leave some room to be sure that when he's speaking to you, you can hear his voice. And you know what we've done in this culture? I mean, it's something that grieves me almost every day. As a pastor of a church, even the greatest, most loyal followers of Jesus, we've switched to, instead of trying to squeeze God in, we're squeezing him out. We've always thought the culture was doing that. Now we're doing it. There are all kinds of studies on this. What gets left at the bottom of the list? If I don't get everything else done I want to get done, what do we get? What gets crossed? Well, we just won't go to church tomorrow. I happen to think when you're part of a vibrant church, we need to be together. There's things that happen when we're together. I think Jesus wants us to gather in churches. That's why this happened in the New Testament, those first few chapters of Acts. People were getting together because Jesus wanted us to get together in this thing called churches. Not all churches are good churches. There's some out there that are disasters. And people have been hurt. But I'm saying, me sometimes, I catch myself trying to squeeze God into my life because I'm just so busy. And if it's happening to me, most likely it's happening to you, probably ramped up a notch or two. Our families, our homes need some breathing room. Determine today you're going to make some room for there to be something happen that you hadn't planned on. Think of the conversations that might happen with just enough time to hang out with somebody. That conversation could begin to happen. We're going to have wisdom if we'll do this. Wisdom. James says the wisdom from above is pure, peace-loving, gentle at all times, willing to yield to others. It's full of mercy and the fruit of good deeds. It shows no favoritism, and it's always sincere. Colossians remind us that it's in Jesus lie all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge, in Jesus. A lot here to process, a lot to think about. Just think if we began making more room for Jesus in our life, to get a clear picture every day of what does it look like for me to follow Jesus in the current circumstances or the current pressures. Mark 6:31 at the bottom of your note page says this. Here's Jesus as a reminder. We'll close with this. Let's go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest a while. He said this because there were so many people coming and going that Jesus and his apostles did not even have time to eat. And Jesus, by his actions, said, this isn't good. You have a card in your worship folder. It says Psalm 90 on it. We're going to read this as we're doing every Sunday during the series. After we read it, the prayer teams will be gathered here at the front. If you have things that you need to be praying about or you want someone to pray for you, we'd love to do that. It may have nothing to do with the message today. It may be you're carrying a situation that's very difficult to carry. Maybe you've heard that you have that word cancer. Perhaps you've heard that a loved one has. Or maybe you've got a relationship crisis going. Whatever it is, I hope you know that you can be prayed with and prayed for before you walk out of this room. So the prayer teams will be here at the front after we close in prayer. Let's stand together, and this will be our closing prayer. We'll read it together. Read it with me. Ready? Teach us to realize the brevity of life so that we may grow in wisdom. O Lord, come back to us. How long will you delay? Take pity on your servants. Satisfy us each morning with your unfailing love, so we may sing for joy to the end of our lives. Give us gladness in proportion to our former misery. Replace the evil years with good. Let us, your servants, see you work again. Let our children see your glory. And may the Lord our God show us his approval and make our efforts successful. Yes, make our efforts successful. Everybody said? Amen. Amen. Amen.